Thank you for inviting me here today. I hope I'm going to meet your expectations. Thank you firstly to the University of New South Wales, my honored sister, High Commissioner of South Africa, honored brother, High Commissioner of India, other honored guests here, Mr. Neville Roche, and others. Once again, thanks to all of you all for inviting me to this function. I think it is an important visit to Australia because tomorrow the International Centre of Nonviolence in Sydney is going to be launched. And I think that the more centers of nonviolence that we can launch in various countries, the more it would be possible for us to work towards a culture of nonviolence and a situation in the world where violence will become redundant. Before I discuss the legacy of Gandhiji, I will briefly reflect on the situation of violence as it affects us today and the importance of education, among other things, in curbing the violence. What we see is the growing culture of all kinds of violence, physical, psychological, emotional, and economic, domestic violence, structural violence, violence and wars based on communal, ethnic, religious, and other differences, and violence perpetrated by those protesting against issues of workers' rights, service delivery, and access to basic needs. Many reasons have been cited by researchers for the proliferation of these forms of violence. Among them are societal and gender inequality, lack of confidence in the justice system, growing levels of poverty and unemployment, easy access to legal and illegal weapons, considering violence as the only way of dealing with conflict, and a breakdown in family structures and in the moral fabric of society. These are some of the things that researchers have cited as causes of violence. Yeah. In considering solutions to these problems, many have cited that education is basic. We believe not only that education is basic, but that it should be revamped in order to ensure that it transmits messages of nonviolence and good basic human values from the early childhood learning phase to tertiary level and beyond, and that these messages are contained in all training, in all subjects and all faculties across the curriculum. The early learning phase is particularly crucial because it is in these early years that a child learns essential values, way of living, and basic mannerisms, as well as approaches to others. These are learned through very close observation and imitation. So parents, significant others, such as extended family, ECD educators, and so on, play a crucial role in entrenching these values, mannerisms, approaches, prejudices, and discriminations in the child. Among these learning processes, communication becomes a very important cog in the wheel. There are many forms of communication, and it is well known that often In violent clashes, communication is a key factor in determining whether the possibility of curbing the violence is highly possible or will be difficult. Knowing this, then, it is important for us to learn the art of nonviolent communication. This, again, can be easily learned from the very early learning phase and can be a subject throughout life. Kendra Cherry, a prominent educator and writer, wrote in a blog, "Early childhood is a time of remarkable physical, cognitive, social, and emotional development. Language, mannerisms, likes and dislikes are all learned behavior, and the learning starts at this level. Good and intensive investment into this level of education can make a lifelong difference to an individual." The late Josie Toda, who was a prominent educator and second president of Soka Gakkai, was quoted by Daisaku Ikeda as saying, and I quote, "Education, or the fostering of capable people, is indeed a noble mission, and those with a deep sense of responsibility who completely dedicate themselves to this mission are truly worthy of respect." Now, this statement reveals a number of important assumptions. It highlights the power of education in fostering capable people, and it raises the important issues of content and method of education. But it also emphasizes the importance of the personality of the educator. And if I can divert for a minute and tell you a little story about Gandhiji, when a mother approached him and told him to speak to her child and ask him to stop eating sweet because he was diabetic. Gandhiji told the mother, "Come back in 2 weeks' time and then I'll speak to the child." She went away, and 2 weeks later she returned. And when she returned, Gandhiji then spoke to the little child and asked him to give up sweets. The child then promised Gandhiji. It took like about 3 minutes to do that. And when the mother was leaving, she asked Gandhiji, "It took you just 3 minutes. Why did you call me back? Why couldn't you tell him 2 weeks ago when I first came here?" And Gandhiji's response was, "At that time, I was eating sweets." From this, we can see the vital nature of both understanding the nature and occurrence of violence and the role of education in curbing the violence. Turning then to the legacy of Gandhiji, for me, the importance of this legacy lies in particular in the 21 years he spent in South Africa. You know, Nelson Mandela said that India gave South Africa Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, and South Africa returned the Mahatma to India. So it was the 21 years that were the most crucial years when he transformed. A closer study of these years, that is from 1893 to 1914, one sees the transformation of the young barrister who arrived in South Africa on business and the middle-aged revolutionary who left South Africa in 1914. The significance lies in the nature of the changes he made to his life and to his thoughts. I have chosen to tabulate some of the key moments in his life, and it's not complete because there is so much that I will keep you sitting here for the whole night if I were to talk about everything. I've just chosen 3 incidents, and those were the 3 sort of that contributed to the change, amongst many others. And to look at what were the influences that triggered these change, and then to look at some of the main ways in which he changed his life. Perhaps it is important to raise here 2 significant ways in which Gandhiji stands out as different from other philosophers, and this is my view. Firstly, he has not written any academic work in which he presents his philosophy. He wrote his seminal work, which was called Hind Swaraj, but that is in the form of a conversation and is nothing when compared to works such as Marx's Das Kapital, or Plato's The Republic, or Tolstoy's War and Peace. Yet it contains an equal amount of information. And number 2, he crystallized in his mind a particular belief and immediately set about putting it into practice. So he was not just a theoretician, but he put all the things that he thought about into practice before he even wrote them. This then makes it impossible to understand his beliefs just from his writings without understanding how he actually put them into practice and vice versa. When he came to South Africa, among other things, he faced 6 major challenges in South Africa. The first one was blatant racism, which was entrenched through legislation in South Africa. The second was the strong influence of 4 major religions that he came across in South Africa: Islam, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and Hindu religion. The third was the colonialism that existed in South Africa. The fourth, a highly unjust, unequal economic and social divide based on race that existed in South Africa. The fifth was the working of the psychology of the oppressed through the debilitating influence of the dominating culture of the oppressor on the oppressed. And sixth, the exploitation of the environment and natural resources by human beings. At that time, you would remember that South Africa had these huge gold mines going on in the country. So he was concerned about the environment, and that was in the 1890s. He was able to fathom that underlying all these challenges was the retention of dominance through monopolizing economic and military power. His learning took place in 3 different ways. Firstly, experiences of discrimination and humiliation. Secondly, from his reading and study of literature. And thirdly, interaction with intellectuals in the various fields. He writes in his autobiography that soon after he arrived in South Africa, he was under persuasion to study the Quran by his hosts, Dada Abdullah and others of the Islamic faith. He willingly studied the scripture and attended the prayers at the mosque. On arriving in Pretoria, he writes that he was influenced by some members in the law firm where he was based. He was persuaded to read the Bible and attend church, which again he willingly did. He had many Zoroastrian friends whom he met in Durban, and there he learned about their religion. But he wrote to Rechan Bhai, a friend of his and a scholar of Hindu religion, in whom Gandhiji had confidence, to advise him on the Hindu faith and whether there would be any merit in him converting to either Islam or to Christianity. He then came to the conclusion that he respected all the religions, but there was no need to convert from his religion to another, as he could easily practice all of them with equal value and respect. Having experienced the humiliation of being thrown off a train in Pietermaritzburg, of which he wrote extensively, he had to make a choice between meek submission, strong objection and protest, or leaving the country and returning home. He chose to stay and oppose. This led to him reading a number of books on political philosophy. Amongst them were Marx, Thoreau, Tolstoy, Ruskin, Bentham, and many others. Eventually, in 1906, he came up with the idea of satyagraha. And in 1909, he wrote his book, Hind Swaraj. But an important catalyst in his life happened 2 years after his arrival in South Africa. In April 1985, Gandhiji and his articled clerk, Mr. Lawrence, walked to the Marian Hill Monastery, started by a Trappist monk, Father Francis Fanner. He was deeply impressed by what he saw at the monastery, comprising of 120 monks, 60 nuns, and 1,200 learners. All were living together in such harmony and peace. And he wrote in The Vegetarian, published in London, and I'm quoting now, "My companions and I walked to Marian Hill. It is a very pleasant walk through the little hills, all covered with green grass. One of the brotherhood came up and bowed very low. The settlement is a quiet little model village. The principle of liberty, equality, and fraternity is carried out in its entirety. Every man is a brother, every woman a sister. A model Trappist gets up at 2 a.m. and devotes 4 hours to prayers and contemplation. At 6, he has his breakfast, which consists of bread and coffee, or some such of simple foods. He dines at 7 or 8 p.m. None may keep money for private use. All are equally rich or poor. A better instance of undying faith and perfect implicit obedience could not well be found anywhere else. If their repast is the simplest possible, their dining tables and bedrooms are no less so. They believe in no color distinction. I know from personal experience that a visit to the farm is worth a voyage from London to Natal. He was that impressed with this monastery. And this is an extract from Fatima Meer's book, The South African Gandhi. This visit influenced him deeply, and we see some of the ideas replicated in his life. In fact, some years later, he asked Mr. Kallenbach to visit the monastery and learn leatherwork from them, from the nuns and the monks, which the latter did, and returned and taught Gandhiji and others leatherwork. And Gandhiji then made a pair of sandals and gave it to General Smuts, who was his arch enemy, because he was the one who put him in prison in South Africa. And he gave him a pair of slippers, which still are there in the museum in India. 8 years after his first visit to this monastery, Gandhiji started printing his own newspaper, The Indian Opinion, in Durban. This, he wrote, was a tool to educate, to inform, and mobilize the people. It was produced in 4 different languages, in Hindi, Tamil, Gujarati, and English. In 1904, however, he took the decision to set up his own settlement and bought the Phoenix Farm, where he relocated his printing press and invited a group of people who were involved in the publication of the newspaper to join him in this experiment of communal life. Albert West, one of the early settlers, wrote about this move. But before I quote him, I just want to say that Phoenix Settlement is located in a place which was in the neighborhood where the first president of ANC comes from, Dr. John Dube. He was a neighbor of Gandhiji. And Isaiah Shembe, who ran one of the biggest churches, or a traditional church, lived as a neighbor to Gandhiji in Inanda. He chose to buy his farm in that locality. Mr. West said, and I quote, "This came about in an interesting way. My report on the financial situation of the newspaper had greatly disturbed Gandhi, and he decided to make a full investigation on the spot. That night, he left Johannesburg. Henry Pollack, the sub-editor of The Critic, who had made the acquaintance of Gandhi at the time of the plague and had become a close friend, came to see him off at the station and left him with a book to read during the 24-hour journey to Durban. It was Ruskin's Unto This Last. The reading of this book, Gandhi declared, brought about an instantaneous and practical transformation in his life. He came to realize that the good of the individual is contained in the good of all, that a lawyer's work has the same value as the barber's. I don't know if you agree with him, but that's what he said, that a lawyer's work has the same value as a barber's, inasmuch as all have the same right of earning their livelihood from their work. That a life of labor, that is the life of the tiller of the soil and the handicraftsman, is the life worth living. So he decided to reduce these principles to practice. And this was quoted in the Illustrated Weekly of India in 1965. He moved the press to Phoenix, and with it, all the people who worked in the press. Most of them considered the scheme to be idealistic and doubted that it would work, but went along with Gandhiji's ideas. And West wrote, and I quote, "To say that I approved of the proposal suggests a certain amount of wishful thinking. I was certainly in love with the idea, and my love for Gandhi was sufficient to make me want to succeed in this venture. There was much in this life in open country that was attractive. We enjoyed friendly relations with the Africans living in the surrounding hillsides and with passers-by to and from the station." That was written by Mr. West, and again it was in the Illustrated Weekly of India, published in 1965. The Phoenix settlement continues to exist. Even though it existed as a settlement until 1985. Then it fell under apartheid violence and was rebuilt in 2000 by the democratic government, and now continues to exist as a historic site, a heritage that is respected and inspires thousands who visit the place. The newspaper Indian Opinion, later known as Opinion, continued until 1962. In 2000, Satyagraha was started and continues until today as a monthly publication. It can be accessed in PDF format at www.gdt.org.za. I'll give you that later if you want to access it. But Gandhiji also experienced another important turning point in his life. And this happened in 1906, when Gandhiji participated as a stretcher bearer on the side of the British during the Bambata uprising. He was horrified at the absolute carnage that took place in this war. He resolved even more firmly to promote nonviolence, and he took the vow of brahmacharya. Gandhiji explains the meaning of the term brahmacharya as not being just a vow of celibacy, but more as a devotee who tries to attain moksha, that is nirvana, and through discovering the path of truth and virtue. This vow, Gandhiji wrote, helped him to gain the moral and spiritual strength to continue his community and political work. Gandhiji's life has been so profound that one can say a lot more and yet not cover everything. I have chosen just to touch on these 3 turning points and then to look at exactly how his life changed over the period of the 21 years in South Africa, and look at those changes as being the legacy that we talk about. There are 15 transformations that I've looked at. And the first one is his transformation to his lifestyle, from an affluent lifestyle to a simple lifestyle, where he gave up the luxuries of town life, where he had access to basic services such as running water, electricity, refuse removal, sewerage system, etc., and opted to live in the rural area of Inanda without any of these facilities and doing the work himself. The second was his changed attitude from being class conscious and status conscious as a barrister, and opted to live and identify with the poor. I forgot to mention that where he lived in Inanda at Phoenix Settlement, right next door was the barracks in which the indentured workers lived, people who were working on the sugar estates at that time, and he chose to live next to them. The third was he gave up the notion of individualism and chose to live in a communal setting, sharing and using wisely the land he had bought. The fourth was trying to develop a self-sufficient community through taking care of their own needs, through using their own labor where possible, and growing their own food. During this time, he began to see, and this is the fifth one, he began to see the need for time management and punctuality. Those of you who have read about Gandhiji, you'll realize that he was absolutely punctual and a real paragon at time management. Number 6, people who came to live with him on the settlement belonged to different faiths. linguistic groups, and races, and he started the practice of worshiping in a neutral environment. He believed that God wasn't imprisoned in a temple or a church or a mosque. He was everywhere, and you can pray just as well outside the buildings as you can inside any of the buildings. So he said his prayers outside, and they chanted the prayers of all the different religions together. So he embraced this diversity, and he considered diversity as an enriching factor rather than as a reason for conflict and division. Number 7, on the settlement, he began to experiment with education, as he found the formal state-run educational institutions as ways of promoting the dominant value of racism and superiority of the West. And this was also the feeling of Mr. Shembe and Mr. Dube, who were his neighbors. They also started their own schools, their own institutions, where they raised the dignity of the person, the oppressed people. He started this at Phoenix, and later in India, he started the Nai Talimi form of teaching, which is basic education. And it's important for us to look at how that basic education theory was applied. Number 8, he began to also look at how to develop not only a child's skills and knowledge, but also his body, mind, and soul in this education. Number 9, at Phoenix, and particularly after the Bambata uprising, Gandhiji realized the importance of self-control and began experimenting on self-control, not only in terms of sex, but in terms of all aspects of life. Number 10, he also came into contact during this time with a number of very powerful women, besides Kasturba, who was his wife and who was very powerful, who all influenced his development of gender consciousness. And so he changed from a patriarchal thinking to much more radical thought about the status of women. Number 11, he also began to see and understand what liberation or Swaraj means, literally translating Swaraj as control over the self. He began to see that liberation is not licensed to do whatever you want to do, but rather the control over yourself to the extent that others too can enjoy the liberation. So each one has a right and a responsibility. And this is something that Gandhiji began to entrench in his lifestyle. Number 12, during this time, he began to look at economic models and started thinking about new models of economy, eventually working out the idea of trusteeship. Number 13, he further developed his social views and looked at the prevailing majoritarian views and felt that a better view was to look at the good of all, which he called Sarvodaya. It means the good of everybody. So he moved away from Bentham's policy where it was looking at what is good for the majority, but rather to see how we can benefit every single individual. Number 14, his ideas about the rapid industrialization also began to be formed at this time. And he wrote about these views in Hind Swaraj. Many people still talk about how archaic those views were. But when we think about it, let's look at what is happening today in the world in terms of climate change. We all are experiencing it. The animals are experiencing it. The plants are experiencing it. And the future is going to be bleak because water will be scarce, food will be scarce, and so on. If we want to save the planet, we need to look at some of these ideas. They may appear archaic, but let's see how we can apply them to present-day situation. Finally, in line with the thinking of people such as Paulo Freire and others, he began to look at the issue of identity and started the idea of going back to our own roots and ways of doing things rather than aping the oppressor. In South Africa, we call it indigenous knowledge systems. Let's find those indigenous knowledge systems and apply them and build them up, because we have just taken another system and are applying it to our lives. Let's go back to our roots and find those systems and see how they can be applied. Gandhiji quotes Professor Huxley on his views of education. And I quote, that man, I think, this is what Professor Huxley said, that man, I think, has had a liberal education, who has been so trained in youth that his body is the ready servant of his will, and does with ease and pleasure all the work that as a mechanism he is capable of, whose intellect is a clear, cold logic engine with all its parts of equal strength and in smooth working order, whose mind is stored with the knowledge of the fundamental truths of nature, whose passions are trained to come to heel by a vigorous will, the servant of a tender conscience, who has learned to hate all violence and respect others as himself. Such a one, and no other, I conceive, has had a liberal education, for he is in harmony with nature. In that one paragraph, Huxley has captured many issues that Gandhiji raised. Professor Bhikhu Parekh describes Gandhiji's transformation beautifully when he says that Gandhiji saw truth as the basis and that one needed to be truthful to oneself before anything else. And then through that understanding of oneself, he or she can then transmit it to others. That learning and transformation is a journey through which one discovers truths, through self-reflection, and we make the changes in our lives which are necessary to be in tune with the truth. So discovering the truth within oneself first. So how does this impact on the present education system? Some of the key ideas have been seen through Gandhian perspectives, but the basic issues that we face is that our present education system is geared towards providing skills and knowledge. Toda's quote is in, I'll put it here. These were some of the things that came out. Yeah. And certainly, there is something that needs to be corrected in our system, which is giving rise to the growing culture of crime, corruption, entitlement, consumerism, violence, impatience, oppression, exploitation, and self-centeredness. This we see throughout. It's not in one country. It's not, in some people. some race groups. People do say that it's only the poor or it's only certain people who, show these tendencies. It's a tendency that exists internationally and in every country. How do we change this tendency? What are the changes we want to see? And each of us, within our own context, need to look at this. These two questions. Firstly, what are those changes that we want to see? And secondly, how do we make a change? And come up with our own answers. There's no blueprint. We can't give you a blueprint from South Africa, and I think that what applies here in Australia may not apply in the same way in South Africa. So each one of us needs to look for those solutions within our own context. Gandhiji did not give any blueprint either. So just looking at his legacy is not giving you a blueprint. And if those people who think that Gandhiji said, give up your, luxurious home, give up cars, and give up your clothes and all those things, wear a loincloth, that's not what Gandhiji said. Gandhiji said that there are certain things that are necessary for life, for an ordinary life, and that everybody needs. But when you start taking beyond those needs, that's when you are now taking something from other people, because the earth has enough to meet everybody's need, but not people's greed. So that is the lesson that Gandhiji left with us. And then he said, truth and love. Those are the two principles that we should remember. By using this, we can find ways of changing things. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.